Now, let's turn our attention back to the Near East and examine the aftermath of the fall of the Third Dynasty of Ur in 2004 BC. The 2 centuries following the collapse of Ur III were largely dominated by conflict between Elam and the various successor kingdoms of Ur III. The Amorites, who had gradually infiltrated Mesopotamia over several generations, now held control over a number of prominent cities, including Isin and Larsa in the south, and Babylon in the north. The regional culture remained Akkadian-Sumerian, with Nippur assuming the role of a religious capital, and whichever ruler held temporary control over the city, claiming the traditional title of King of Sumer and Akkad. A relatively new civilization that emerged during this period was Assyria, not to be confused with Syria, the region located to the west of Mesopotamia. The kingdom of Assyria first appeared in the early 24th century BC, centered on the city of Assur, or Ashur, situated on the Tigris River in northern Mesopotamia. The city, named after its patron god and passing that name on to its people, benefited from its central location within a trade network, exchanging tin from the Persian plateau, textiles from Mesopotamia, and silver and gold from Anatolia. Trade was essential for the Assyrians, who had poor soil and grazing lands, but needed a way to fortify their capital against other militant barbarian kingdoms to the north, including the Hittites to the northwest and the Hurrians to the northeast, both of whom we'll be discussing again shortly. The early Assyrian kings were only regional leaders, subject to Sargon of Akkad. However, after the fall of the Old Assyrian Empire, and especially after the fall of Ur III, Assyria made its bid for greater regional influence. Around 1800 BC, Assyria, under the Amorite king Shamshi-Adad I, conquered all of Mesopotamia north of Babylon, stretching from Ashnunna in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains to the east to Yamhad on the Syrian steppe to the west. These conquests led to the establishment of the Old Assyrian Empire. There's evidence suggesting that Shamshi-Adad also exerted power over the south. The Babylonian king Hammurabi, whom we'll be discussing shortly, apparently ruled under Assyria's overarching authority. Around the same time, Larsa had begun to create a southern Mesopotamian kingdom under its ruler, Rim-Sin, who may have been of Elamite origin and enjoyed a long reign of 60 years. When Rim-Sin captured the city of Isin in 1793 BC, during the 30th year of his reign, Larsa's only remaining rival was Babylon, which had established a central Mesopotamian kingdom of its own. The following year, Hammurabi, the 6th Amorite ruler of Babylon, ascended to the throne. Seeing himself surrounded by the Assyrians to the north and Larsa to the south, he wisely decided to remain low-key and bide his time. Back up in the north, Shamshi-Adad had based himself in the city of Shubat-Enlil, located in the central north of his new territorial holdings, and placed his 2 sons in other strategic locations. But delegating authority didn't mean he was going to be a hands-off ruler. As a letter to his presumably less favored son, Shamshi-Adad, illustrates, "How long do we have to guide you in every matter? Are you a child and not an adult? Don't you have a beard on your chin? When are you going to take charge of your house? Don't you see that your brother is leading vast armies? So you too take charge of your palace, your house. Geez, Dad, get off my back." Well, as it turned out, Shamshi-Adad's concerns about his son's leadership abilities proved to be pretty justified. When he died in 1776 BC, whether in battle or from natural causes is unknown. The territories of the Old Assyrian Empire slipped away almost immediately, with Shamshi-Adad being kicked out of his base at Mari for good measure. Free from Assyrian domination, Mari would quickly emerge as a powerful northern kingdom in its own right, as would another local kingdom called Eshnunna. Before long, Assyria was reduced to the core region immediately surrounding the city of Assur, still under the control of Shamshi-Adad's eldest son, Ishme-Dagan. But don't worry, we haven't heard the last of the Assyrians. Not by a long shot. The decade following the fall of the Old Assyrian Empire saw a jumble of shifting alliances among the regional powers. Eshnunna attacked Mari, but then Mari formed an alliance with Babylon and Larsa, along with Elam, to crush Eshnunna. Elam's subsequent attempt to pit Babylon against Larsa backfired, and the two kingdoms, along with Mari, combined their forces to crush Elamite power in 1764 BC. With Assyria and Elam removed as threats, Hammurabi decided that the time was ripe for Babylon to make its bid for regional power. In 1763 BC, Hammurabi moved against his erstwhile ally, Rim-Sin, now an old man, and conquered the southern cities of Isin, Uruk, and Larsa. Then, in 1761 BC, he led Babylon's armies north against another former ally, King Zimri-Lim of Mari. Mari at the time was a wealthy and flourishing kingdom, an important trans-shipping point for tin from the Persian plateau on its way to the Mediterranean. Zimri-Lim's palace, with its 300 rooms, may have been the largest of the age, and Mari's voluminous diplomatic archives, rediscovered in the 20th century, are the source of much of our information about this turbulent period. Hammurabi defeated Zimri-Lim, conquered Mari, and sometime later had the palace and city walls razed to the ground. Ironically, it was precisely this leveling and burial that preserved the archives for later recovery. Hammurabi then went on to impose vassal status on what remained of Assyria. Appropriately ironic, since early in his rule, Hammurabi had been a vassal of the Assyrian king. Perhaps his most devastating military achievement during this northern campaign was his conquest of the city of Eshnunna, which he forced to surrender by diverting its water supply. By the end of this series of conquests, Hammurabi had created what is known as the Old Babylonian Empire, and the city of Babylon itself had been transformed into the dominant power of central and southern Mesopotamia, a position it would maintain for the next 500 years, long enough for the term Babylonia to become synonymous with Mesopotamia. Hammurabi was as effective a statesman as he was a military commander, bringing a level of stability to the region that it hadn't experienced since the collapse of Ur centuries before. During his rule, Babylon became the largest city in the world and the first to reach a population of over 200,000. Babylonian merchants, like their predecessors, operated throughout Mesopotamia and also engaged in regular trade with the Amorite city-states of Syria and Canaan to the west. Perhaps Hammurabi's most enduring legacy was the compilation of a code of laws, one of the most complete to survive from the ancient world. The Code of Hammurabi is divided into 282 sections dealing with family, property, and commercial law, as well as with slavery, professional fees, prices, and wages, among other fundamental legal principles. The code allowed for the presentation of evidence by both plaintiff and defendant, and it presumed the innocence of the accused. Laws were often enforced by leading figures in the community, with each offense receiving a specified punishment, often brutal in nature. A contemporary copy of the code now resides in the Louvre Museum in Paris. Modern scholars believe that it was not a code of law per se, but rather a monument presenting Hammurabi as an exemplary legal arbiter, or, as he himself put it, "May any wronged man who has a case come before my statue as king of justice, and may he have my inscribed stele read aloud to him. May he hear my precious words, and may my stele clarify his case for him. May he examine his lawsuit, and may he calm his troubled heart. May he say, Hammurabi provided just ways for the land." Babylonian beliefs held that the king was an agent of the city's god Marduk, and that Babylon was a holy city where any legitimate ruler of Mesopotamia had to be crowned. Babylonia adopted the written Semitic Akkadian language for official use and retained the Sumerian language, which was no longer widely spoken, for religious, ceremonial, literary, and scientific purposes. Akkadian and Sumerian traditions continued to play a major role in Babylonian society, and the region would remain an important cultural center down through the succeeding centuries. One local tradition, however, was impacted by the period of Amorite rule. The era of the Sumerian city-state was permanently over, and Mesopotamian territory, when not united, would from now on be divided into regional kingdoms. Amorite rule was also notable for ending the exclusive control over people, land, and livestock by the state, that is, by kings and priests. The new monarchs gave away or leased out for an indefinite period numerous parcels of land, freed their subjects from taxes and forced labor, and seemed to have encouraged a new society to emerge. A society of large-scale farmers, free citizens, and enterprising merchants. This privatization also had a downside, including a growing gap between rich and poor, and a degree of general public indebtedness that had to be addressed through frequent debt holidays, when all loans were considered null and void. In the long run, this wildly swinging business cycle benefited neither rich nor poor. In addition, with the shrinking of the centralized state came the neglect of critical urban infrastructure. People began to leave the cities for the countryside, and the urban population of Babylonia dropped to its lowest point in 1,000 years. After Hammurabi's death in 1750 BC, his empire continued on under 5 successors, each reigning for over 20 years and together keeping the territory more or less united for over 150 years, longer than the entire Earth III period. The end, when it finally came completely out of left field, or more accurately, out of the far northwest field. In 1595 BC, Babylonia fell victim to an attack by fearsome invaders called the Hittites. Under their king Mursili I, the Hittites swept down into Mesopotamia, riding in 2-wheeled battle chariots that were far swifter and more maneuverable than the 4-wheeled Mesopotamian war wagons. The Hittites were victorious in battle and sacked Babylon, overthrowing the last Amorite king, Shamshi-Adad I, and putting an end to the Old Babylonian Empire. After plundering Babylon, and with no desire to occupy the territory, the victorious Hittites retreated with their booty to their rugged homeland in central Anatolia, leaving the region leaderless.